Fishing, or angling, has more participants than any other sport in the world. There are literally hundreds of species of fish man tries to catch, some to eat, others purely for the sport. It cannot be denied that many of us have inherent instincts to hunt and for freedom. Two reasons why fishing appeals to so many. Whole communities in many parts of the world rely on fishing to survive, and with easier travel and wider knowledge of what's on offer, fishing is becoming global. For these and many other reasons, fishing has become part of several cultures, not least that of Scotland, where the salmon is the king. What we're about to see not only gives us an insight into the world of the salmon and those who fish for them, but it also helps us understand how living, breathing ecosystems are sometimes helped by those who exploit them.
People are learning more and more each year about salmon fishing, but the mystery still remains. I mean, no one actually can explain why a fly can go past a fish's mouth time and time again and it won't show any interest at all, and yet one time passed, half an hour later, and the fish will go for it as if it's never seen it before. It's extraordinary.
Salmon fishing is a tantalisingly frustrating sport, but when it goes right and you catch a fish, it's an incredible feeling of achievement. It requires a lot of effort.
The excitement when the fish takes and you think, oh, I've got one. It's tremendous, absolutely tremendous. When you get fish straight from the sea, bars of silver, black on top, absolutely shining. I mean, they just look fantastic.
The roof of the mouth. A good fight. Can't complain about it.
The take of a salmon is perhaps the most exciting thing in fishing. Then you're out in the open air, in the wilds, in the rushing water, or the still water as the case may be. You're a hunter, and a kind of innocent, modern, civilized hunter. It's nice.
Among fishermen, the Atlantic salmon is revered. Salmon can be found in most cool, clean rivers with access to the sea on both sides of the northern Atlantic Ocean. At one time, they occupied almost every river in Britain, but man's impact on their freshwater environment has meant that not all our rivers now contain salmon. In recent years, the number of adults returning to freshwater has declined dramatically. As a consequence, fishery managers and anglers alike are going through a necessary transition from pure exploitation to a more balanced and considerate approach. Salmon are, after all, part of our living landscape, our heritage, a natural resource for all, not just for those who fish for them. Salmon are migratory, spending part of their lives in the sea and part in fresh water. Salmon rely on rivers and streams not only as a refuge before spawning as adults, but also as a habitat for their young. Whilst in freshwater, salmon are reasonably easy to observe, so we've been able to study a sizable proportion of their life there. The salmon starts life as an egg no bigger than a pea, buried beneath the riverbed through the winter. Sometime in the spring, it hatches into an alevin and spends several weeks in the gravel, feeding off its yolk sac, which hangs below its body. When the yolk sac is almost exhausted, the alevin emerges from the gravel, is known as fry, and begins life in the stream. The fries spread out, form territories in the river, and are known as parr. They remain in freshwater as par for several years before migrating to sea. Their behavior changes as they abandon their territories, become silvery in appearance, and form small shoals of fish known as smolts. Smolts migrate to sea in the spring, and once there, they're lost from view, though the locations of their main feeding grounds in the Atlantic are known. They won't be seen again for over a year, when they return home to their distinct river. Having utilized the ocean's rich feeding for the past year, the adults will have grown from a few ounces to around 7 pounds or more. They have large deposits of body fat, which, apart from making them very good eating, enables females to produce thousands of eggs. Amazingly, they will return, along with the adult males, to the river of their birth to breed, starting the circle of life for the next generation. It's been said that until you've seen a wild salmon, you've not seen what a fish should be. Its streamlined shape and bright silver colour are complemented by its speed, agility and endurance. Even superficially, we can see that they are remarkable creatures with a depth of character that is charismatic. Their need for power and speed to ascend the rivers of their birth and to outwit predators make them an exciting sporting fish, providing the thrills the angler seeks, often hand in hand with peace and serenity. The angler and salmon form one of the most interesting predator-prey relationships, complicated by self-imposed rules and etiquette on the predator's behalf.
I have a variety of ludicrous fly boxes, you know. Well, what do you,
Glad to hear it.
what do you select out of that mishmash? There's a little trouble, isn't it?
That would do for your point, don't you?
Yeah, now, what about, I mean, that sort of thing?
From an angling viewpoint, salmon fly fishing is, at first glance, an almost preposterous pastime. Fishermen use inefficient methods and equipment which maximize the salmon's role in its own capture. It's about persuading the fish to make the first move in its undoing by deciding to take the fly. On top of these self-imposed fishing rules, adult salmon do not feed in fresh water, which makes the chances of getting one to take a fly even more remote. Conveniently, this also provides another excuse
no wind, bright sun.
for the unsuccessful angler.
See, they've been fished at a fair bit, these fish. They've been coming up and down with the tide now. Probably.
They're just never going to get caught in this sort of weather. These sort of conditions, perfect conditions really for a day on the beach.
The fact that returning salmon do not feed makes biological sense, since the streams they favour are not capable of sustaining a population of feeding adults. Instead, they gorge themselves at sea and cease feeding before they enter the shallow water of our coastlines. Nevertheless, thousands of anglers spend an enormous amount of time, effort and money in an attempt to catch a salmon on rod and line. The mystery of why salmon take lures seems only to add to the fisherman's enjoyment.
What you're doing is fooling the fish. They have the right to reject it. When you've got just a bit of fur and feather on a hook and you flicker it about in the water and you get that fish to come up and take it, that's really what it's all about, I think. The fight is wonderful. Bigger the fish, the better the fight. But if you can just get it to come up and go whoosh, and you've got them on, that's the best bit, really is.
And that's the view of a seasoned expert. But what of the momentous occasion of someone's very first salmon? It can be such a tense affair that it's almost impossible to enjoy it at all, until after the event.
Oh, come on. Oh, this is ridiculous.
When I've ever fished before for salmon, it's always been blind fishing, unless they jump, say, once or twice. But here, they're just everywhere, big shoals of them, and you're so close to the sea, they're so fresh. After, I'd say, probably about 30, 40 casts into the shoal, this one big one was really interested, and he came at it, and he sort of looked at it, turned away, and then he just grabbed it. All I could think was like, don't lose it, don't lose it. and it was off, zoomed off. You hear the reel sort of... It's brilliant. Come on, Mr. Fishy.
Big game. It's not over yet.
After about 10 minutes, I thought, fingers crossed, this is it. I'll get it in. Because it wasn't tired, it still had its head down, it didn't want to come in. It got to about half an hour and I sort of felt the lactic acid building up in my hand. It was amazing. Unreal, won't forget that.
Well done. How long did it take?
45 minutes.
45.
That deserves a drink. I'm not sure if I can hold it much longer.
As we can see, salmon are living on the edge in many ways, and here in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, we'll follow the story of the salmon and fly fishing for them. The Outer Hebrides, or Western Isles, consist of a chain of islands running north to south off the northwest coast of Scotland. They're steeped in history, with structures still remaining that span thousands of years. The standing stones of Callanish on Lewis, the largest of the islands, are one of the greatest prehistoric monuments in Europe. At 4,000 years old, they're older than the blanket of peat, which covers much of the island. The Western Isles occupy only 1% of the UK landmass, yet have 15% of its surface area of freshwater, and enjoy rain on more than 200 days a year. Little wonder then that fish and fishing are part of its living history. Indeed, the salmon fishing of the Hebrides is world-renowned. The world record catch was held by a Mr. Naylor fishing the Grimmerster on the Isle of Lewis. Amazingly, he took 54 salmon to his rod in one day, and he caught 45 the next. To kill this many fish these days would be frowned upon, but back in the halcyon days of the 1880s, it was relatively commonplace. It's mid-June, and the short summer is well underway. This is the time when all nature bursts into life, having braved another long winter. The growing season is short here, and local crofters are busy tending their flocks. Earning a living in this would-be paradise is difficult, and the rigours of such an existence tell upon the dwindling population. Few youngsters are continuing the traditions of their forefathers. Instead, they head for Stornoway, the Hebridean capital, or for the towns and cities of the mainland. But what a world they're leaving behind. The high annual rainfall on large expanses of peat means that rivers and streams of the Hebrides have a relatively consistent supply of running water. The peat acts as a sponge, releasing moisture slowly into the streams, thus ensuring a constant flow of water even in the driest spells of weather. And this is one such stream, the Fhorsa. It's short when compared with many mainland rivers, but encompasses all the characteristics of a good salmon river. Importantly, there's suitable habitat for the young salmon, and the water is clean and oxygen-rich. The first time we see adult salmon returning from their ocean feeding is at the river mouth. They have travelled thousands of miles across open sea with its disorientating currents and returned to the same river they started from. An exceptional feat of navigation. It's around this time in June that the first bars of silver are seen splashing in the sea. This leaping behaviour and their ability to clear obstacles such as waterfalls is why the salmon acquired its Latin name, Salmo salar, the leaper. There are several theories as to why salmon leap. Some think they're trying to rid themselves of these tiny parasites known as sea lice. Others believe they're leaping for joy or communicating their presence to other salmon. One thing's for certain. If they couldn't leap, they would not be able to ascend the weirs and waterfalls they'll encounter en route to the spawning areas. So perhaps they're just practicing for the rigours ahead. For 4 months, while the salmon run the river, the lives of many in this small community change dramatically. Fishing lodges and guest houses open up. Sea and night patrols to protect the salmon from illegal fishing begin, but perhaps it's the fly fishermen who anticipate their arrival most. Salmon enter Britain's major rivers during nearly every month of the year. However, here in the Hebrides, nearly all the adult salmon return in the summer months, from June through to September. The vast majority are known as grilse, fish which have spent only one winter feeding at sea. Larger salmon, which may have spent 2 or more winters at sea, are uncommon here. These salmon will remain in shoals, roaming around the bay until they enter fresh water, where they will revert to a more solitary, territorial existence. They require rainfall and the subsequent high water levels in order to ascend these small, steep rivers. In periods of dry weather, which frequently coincide with the return of the summer salmon, they cannot enter fresh water. Instead, they congregate around estuaries in large shoals. This bottlenecking is a dangerous time, as they are highly visible and a relatively easy target for natural predators, particularly humans. The salmon don't know much about this and are compelled to act on their instinct to enter fresh water as soon as they can. This is not as easy as it sounds, since the river is unique in its geology and poses its own set of problems for returning fish. The main obstacle is that they have to wait for the right conditions to make it across the shallow beach into the deeper pools of the river. The water in the river channel is barely a foot deep at low tide and is ever-changing, meandering as the elements coax it one way or the other. But it always holds the deepest water at high or low tide. This is the route the salmon will follow. Every day, twice a day, the tide and the open water it provides floods the sands. And twice a day, it recedes. The internal battle between the salmon's instinct to ascend into fresh water and the equally strong instinct to avoid the danger of shallow water put them in something of a quandary. The outcome of this is that for the most part they follow the tide in. Then, as the tide drops, they linger in the ebbing current as long as they dare, before withdrawing and regrouping in a safer spot. Notice how the salmon lie facing the current, whichever way the tide flows. They're behaving in a similar manner as to when in the river. Only when the river is in spate, following heavy rain or during a spring tide, will a significant number of fish brave the shallow channel to their freshwater refuge. Rain is somewhat unpredictable, though fairly regular here in the Western Isles. Tides, on the other hand, are entirely predictable in every way. There are spring tides twice a lunar month, as the sun and moon align, pulling together on the ocean. When high river levels and spring tides coincide, it's likely that most of the fish lingering in the estuary will reach fresh water. Until this happens, the fly fishers who come here from all over the world embrace the unusual practice of fishing for wild Atlantic salmon in salt water. Fly fishing in the sea can feel and look a little unnatural to start with, but years of experimenting have proved it can be very exciting and rewarding. Essentially, the trick is to present a fish with an irresistible opportunity to take your lure or fly. This is not as easy as it sounds. Remember, these fish are not feeding and are easily spooked in the shallow water. They're also moving with the tide in across the beach and back out again twice a day. The whole thing might seem hopeless, but anglers are a committed lot and collectively have come up with some pretty clever ploys. There are two main strategies used here, the group ambush and the more demanding stalking method. A lot of time is spent waiting for the salmon to come within range of the shore, because it's impossible to follow shoals of fish around the bay. It follows that there's no point casting your fly to where the fish aren't, and that in order to have any chance of tempting a salmon, the fish must be able to see your fly. Ambushing and stalking have the same aim, to present the fish with an opportunity to see your fly and maybe take it. Basically, the more often you present your fly to the fish, the more chance you have of catching one.
Yes. Oh, got it. Well done.
Years of accumulated knowledge of where and when salmon are likely to pause the longest has made this piece of water popular, especially on the ebbing tide. We know the shoals will pass here, sometimes lingering for several hours somewhere along this deep channel. The shore is easily accessible and there are no obstacles to get snagged on, but the slippery seaweed underfoot makes wading dangerous, so having several anglers positioned strategically as opposed to one running up and down is far safer. Arranging several anglers side by side ensures the salmon can be fished over wherever they are in the channel. The group is working as a team. The inexperienced young boy is just as likely to have a fish in front of him as the seasoned expert. Everyone enjoys the success of others, especially someone catching their first fish. Ultimately, the angler, no matter how competent, relies on the fish to make the first move. Experience teaches us that this is more likely to happen under certain conditions, but there are no absolutes in salmon fishing. The conditions which theoretically offer the angler the best chance of finding a fish in taking mood also make it difficult to cast. Ideal conditions here include a brisk wind, overcast or broken skies, moderate tide rip and slightly discoloured cool water. Salmon also seem more likely to take when holding position against the tidal current. As in a river, it's uncommon to entice a travelling fish.
Oh. Come on. God, he didn't take it. Come on.
A calm day with blue skies and crystal clear water may make spotting fish and casting a fly easy, but also makes it easier for the fish to see the angler, the line landing, and the fly for what it is.
Closer, closer, closer. Closer, 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 closer.
Warm water and the low oxygen levels that result also make salmon both lethargic and unsettled. These fish aren't going to be caught today. But just try and stop this lot from trying. Stalking shoals of fish along the shoreline is more difficult than being part of the ambush team, but the rewards can be higher for the adventurous individual. It's handy having someone nearby with a landing net, because beaching a fish here takes on a whole different meaning. It's useful having someone positioned high on the cliff, spotting the shoals of fish, as this is virtually impossible from water level. This fisherman can't see any of these fish, except when they leap. If, as in this case, the shoal settles out of range, there's no way of getting closer on foot until the tide turns. But what a beautiful way to be frustrated. This tireless predator doesn't know when to give in, going to great lengths to get near the fish in this craft known as a belly boat. By using a belly boat, it's possible to get near fish in deep water without a boatman, and to have your hands free in order to fish. Belly boats are also easy to carry in a backpack to remote areas before blowing them up. It's always advisable to have friends nearby, of course, and to wear a buoyancy aid in case of unforeseen difficulties. This hunter's cunning has helped him hook a salmon in the North Atlantic, though the local sheep don't seem too impressed. When things go well and a fish is hooked, the battle begins. But you can't just reel them in. First, you have to tire the fish out, being careful not to get overexcited or allow the fish to tangle you in the seaweed. Salmon of this size can take anywhere between 5 and 20 minutes to bring in. The bigger ones might take over an hour. Many an anxious moment passes during the fight. And when, finally, the net swings under the prize, there's a sense of achievement in succeeding against the odds. As a bonus, fish caught in the sea are as beautiful to look at and as delicious to eat as any you could imagine. Heavy rain is forecast and spring tide imminent. The salmon will soon make it into the river across the sands. These anglers know that the next hour or so is going to be their last chance to catch salmon in the sea for a whole year. As expected, rain did coincide with the tide, and most of the salmon pushed up into the river. Some didn't make it all the way to their deep water refuge and are trapped in these small pools on the beach. For the fish, it's only a minor inconvenience, delaying their passage by no more than a few hours until the next tide. But for the fishermen, it offers yet another opportunity.
We're going to cross here and fish down there.
In situations like this, with no obvious cover for the fish or angler, absolute stealth is necessary, or the fish will become edgy, impossible to catch. The angler stands well back from the edge of the pool to ensure the fish can't see him, casting across sand to reach the water. Time after time, the fly passes over the fish with no response. There's an occasional sign of life. And after a few casts, just as the angler is coming to the end of the retrieve, a fish takes.
Yes. Oh, you.
The fly that nearly bore fruit on this occasion was a Curry's red shrimp. To the neutral observer, fly choice should be irrelevant. After all, we're fishing for a creature which isn't eating. However, there are literally thousands of patterns to choose from. And don't be fooled. It's just an excuse for the fishermen to have jewellery boxes. The most popular fly for this river is the silver stoat, partly because it's easy to make and partly because it has proved successful. The more successful it becomes, the more people use it, so the more successful it becomes. And thus the legend is built. Back in the river, the spate water settles to reveal that some of the salmon that made it across the beach have decided to rest up in this deep gorge pool below the falls. Here, it's sometimes possible, with the aid of Polaroid glasses, to observe the salmon and their reaction to flies. The interesting thing is how often salmon twitch or move to a fly without actually taking it or breaking the water's surface. The only real sign to the fisherman that a fish might be interested. What's going through the salmon's mind as it sees the fly approaching and flickering by? Maybe there's a turn of the head or a follow. How often does this happen all over our rivers and lochs? For the sanity of the angler, it's probably better that we don't know, as it's hard to tell from up here who's teasing whom. The age-old question of why a salmon should ever choose to take a lure when it cannot feed also comes up in situations like this.
People have written big, thick books about it. Some people say that it's some kind of reversion to the time when they were very small fish, par in the river, snapping at every insect. I don't think they've got that kind of memory. It might be a reflection of their time in the sea when they really, truly do eat, and they eat lots and lots of little fish like small herring and so on, but simply we don't know.
I think some fish will take because they are inquisitive. At other times, I think fish will take something because their territory is invaded. So I think it's a variety of reasons, and I don't personally think there is one reason why every fish takes a fly.
There's a million theories on why salmon take a fly. Nobody actually knows why salmon take a fly. It's black magic.
Whether it's out of frustration or memory of eating, who can be sure? They always say it doesn't matter what fly is on, if it's the right time, right place, more or less the right lure will get it.
Nobody knows, and I hope nobody finds out either. It's nice to have a mystery.
A few weeks pass and another small rise in the water level has brought a fresh run of salmon into the river. These aren't as patient as the last run and are keen to push up through the waterfalls and onto the loch, where they will remain until spawning in the autumn. They have this formidable set of falls to ascend, and this is the real reason why they leap. If they don't make it over these falls, they won't get to the breeding areas. Thousands of generations have made it before them. Each salmon has to think about the best route through the falls. They first have a good look and make a series of what might be small practice jumps. Then, when they feel they're ready, they commit themselves. Once over the falls, it's only a matter of minutes before the fish are in the loch, where they spread out into the best lies. Initially, a loch looks as though one place is much the same as another, but below the surface there are ledges, boulders, weeds and currents, which all influence where a fish chooses to rest. The salmon have endured years of trial and adversity, and finally they've reached their resting place before spawning. You'd be forgiven for thinking that the fishermen would leave the salmon in peace. But no. Successful salmon fishermen share the same qualities as their prey: perseverance and determination. Skilled fishermen use their knowledge of where salmon like to rest to their advantage and concentrate their efforts on these areas. These same anglers spend lots of time improving technique, learning about the fish, water, weather and flies before anything near predictable catches are made. It only looks easy after years spent perfecting the whole business. By mid-September, most fish, like this one, have already lost the silvery sparkle of the sea as they physically transform into their spawning attire. Amongst other things, the darker colouring makes it harder for natural predators to see the fish in the peaty fresh water.
Look at that monster.
It isn't always easy to fish these productive places from the shore, as in this case, where a strong wind is making it difficult to cast. When things get tough, teamwork is again employed to help the cause. Armed with state-of-the-art fishing technology in the form of a rowing boat, the pair set out in what appears to them to be almost ideal conditions for loch fishing. They've amassed a huge database of where, when and how salmon have been caught here in the past under similar conditions. By using the boat, it's possible to get upwind of the salmon, making it easier to cast. It's also a very comfortable and sociable way of fishing. They first take adrift across some well-known taking lies, but they get no offers. Undaunted, they carry on down the loch to some other good spots. Still nothing happens. It's as though the fish have disappeared, as is often the case in salmon fishing. Thoughts turn to giving in. But our team knows that just like salmon can appear to have vanished, they'll sometimes start to take, as if someone's flipped a switch. They go back to the hot spot once more, this time with different flies. After a few casts, there's a pluck, but no firm contact. The team knows that at any minute they're going to hook a salmon. It's like a sixth sense.
Yes. Yep, you're in.
There's a swirl at the end of the line, everything goes solid, and battle commences. The boat is rowed away from where the salmon are lying so as not to disturb any other fish in the vicinity and spoil chances of getting another one later. After a tense fight of about 15 minutes, a hen salmon of 6 pounds is boated.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Come again.
While conditions remain favourable, the pair head back to the same lie where they sense there are lots of fish. Again, the tension builds. But it isn't long before another fish is hooked.
Oh, yes, in. Lovely. Row away. I think that's got a lot to do with it. Net them as well, with the rod up.
This one doesn't put up much of a fight and comes to the net within a few minutes.
Lovely. Oh. Yes. Right.
The mutual feeling is that this magical period may still not be over. So quietly, the boat drifts back towards the lie and the pair swap roles. Another take, this time from a very acrobatic salmon. It's hard to believe that our anglers were about to give in before the fish decided to give themselves up. Soon the fish tires and is taken for the pot.
Thank you very much, Chris. Right, that's brilliant.
Almost immediately, another salmon is hooked, which again is safely netted to end a wonderful day's sport.
One more time. Gotcha! Oh, oh.
The dark red colouring and large hooked jaw tells us he's a male or cockfish who's been in fresh water quite some time. Salmon as dark as these have usually used up a lot of their fat reserves and are not very good for the table. The tradition is to return them so they have a chance to breed. The practice of returning fish to the water alive is known as catch and release and is not reserved purely for stale fish. Here in the Hebrides, as is the case all over the world, salmon in good condition are also returned alive to the water, even if this beautiful silver fish caught in the sea would have tasted delicious. Until recently, this was a rare sight, but anglers are aware that measures like this will help conserve vulnerable stocks, even if the thought of not keeping any fish at all is perhaps disappointing.
I'm not keen on pure catch and release because this means making the salmon a kind of plaything. And on the other hand, I think that what's happening to me anyway is that I'm now releasing more and more salmon. I'm not keeping. I don't need all the salmon I catch, not that I catch all that many.
To try and, catch a ton of fish and just brag about it isn't what it's about. It's about having one for the pot and enjoying it. It's lovely.
I like the idea that they can go back and they can be the next generation.
In many isolated regions of the United Kingdom, the money and employment generated from angling tourism provides a lifeline for fragile rural economies. Fish numbers are declining so markedly in some areas that without catch and release, a total ban on fishing might be the only other option available to help protect stocks. This would be another devastating blow for the businesses and communities that are partly dependent upon salmon. It's now late November, and the fishing season is over. For the salmon too, the amazing journey is almost complete. At last, they're left alone by the anglers, who will have harvested a small percentage of the river's crop. The fish that have eluded capture are now wearing very distinctive tartan colours. What a contrast to the bars of silver that returned from the sea just a few short months ago. Sometime in early winter, salmon move into the head streams to breed. Throughout the system, they're struggling to reach the spawning beds that have a gravelly bottom and oxygenated flowing water. Energy reserves are low following 5 or 6 months of fasting, and some will perish before completing their mission. Henfish are first to move into the spawning beds. And shortly after, the cocks follow, guided by the scent of the hen's pheromones. The hen chooses a suitable place to dig her nest, known as a redd. Cockfish play no part in cutting the redd, but sometimes, in the absence of competitors, they attend quietly. More often, competition for dominance and the right to breed leads to some spectacular scraps. Throughout the spawning period, cockfish will tirelessly patrol territories, fending off other males. Only the strongest will pass on their genes. The hen digs her redd by turning on her side, and with vigorous movements she creates suction, lifting gravel off the bottom. The current washes this dislodged material downstream, leaving a pit. The presence of flowing water is therefore an important factor the hen will consider when choosing her nest site, and is important for the digging process and replenishing the oxygenated water vital for the egg's survival. Once the nest is deemed satisfactory by the hen, the pair mate. The cloud of milt is washed over the eggs and fertilization takes place immediately. Once this is completed, the hen repeats the cutting process a little upstream, and the dislodged gravel fills in the first nest and creates a new one. This process is repeated until all the eggs are deposited. The spent fish are completely exhausted after their vigorous activities during spawning time, which comes at the end of months without food. Not surprisingly, most fish die, though some survive and return to the ocean. But only about 5% will make it back again to spawn. For most salmon, time is up. The circle is complete, and the journey that has taken them back to where it all began is over. The spent salmon die, but their offspring lies safely beneath the gravel, and next year's run of adults is feeding at sea. Life goes on, besieged by the Hebridean winter that is as harsh as it is beautiful. The salmon is a creature which comes under political and legal attention from many parties with different motives. Although generally well managed, the health of the rivers, which form the backbone of the salmon's life cycle, are at the mercy of not only the lawmakers, but all those who live, work and play in their vicinity. However, at sea, the salmon travel oblivious of countries' borders and fishing quotas.
Whilst we generally know in broad terms how to manage the populations in freshwater, we have no control over what happens in the sea. Now, if we then consider that in the last 30 years or so, the survival of smolts, that's the stage that leaves the river and goes into the sea, has declined in salt water by around 50%. We start to get an idea of where the problems are arising.
Given the delicate population that returns to freshwater, the role of the angler and his relationship with the salmon becomes increasingly important. It is the sport, the income it generates and the passion of those involved in fishing which drives the desire to protect the salmon's future. To that end, the fish that are killed are unknowing martyrs, indirectly helping future generations of their species.
In terms of my catching a few every summer, I don't feel bad about that. Thousands get through, so my 2 or 3 really make no difference at all.
In recognition of the salmon's importance, more and more groups are working together to protect its environment and ensure they return for future generations to enjoy. For this is a remarkable animal and a national resource of which we can all be proud.
What we must do is manage the populations to the best of our abilities, but not expect too much from them. They will recover naturally if recovery is going to take place at all, but it might not be within our lifetime. So probably at the moment the major challenge facing the Atlantic salmon is not so much the salmon itself, but the people who express an interest in the salmon. In other words, perhaps we should be thinking about educating and managing people rather than the salmon. People who express a great interest and a great love for this magnificent fish.
The complexities of the salmon's environments mean that a full understanding of their difficulties may never be known. Provided the fishing community can strike a balance between exploitation and conservation, and provided all those who impact upon its freshwater and saltwater environments understand the consequences of their actions, then it is possible that the salmon may once again reign king of all our rivers.